Okay. The Valravn is an obscure creature from Danish folklore. Some say it's a raven that haunts the battlefield and has gained human thought by eating the heart of a slain king. Others say it's a shape-shifting wolf, raven, griffin thing. Wait, what? It's blank? Is it working? Okay, good. There are animations. And yet other people say that the Valravn is a young nobleman who was cursed to fly around at night in the guise of a raven. In the English-speaking world, it seems to have morphed into some combination of all three things. Many things are said, but never sourced. And on the rare occasion that a source is provided, it's a mediocre mythology encyclopedia that naively repeats the unsourced claims of other authors. My goal with this case study is to put my stupid huge book collection to good use and tell you the actual truth about the Valravn. And hopefully, by the end, you'll have a better understanding of how ancient folklore and mythology might develop in the age of the internet. Join me on this journey through cyberspace, libraries, translation errors, and misunderstandings. The first time I ever read about the Valravn was in second grade. I was crouched at the back of the school library during recess when I found a little book hidden between old historical encyclopedias and mythology compendiums. Fabeldyr Sagnfolk, Fable Beasts and Folkloric Peoples. I devoured that book and learned about everything from trolls and werewolves to mermaids and dragons. But one creature stood out, if nothing else, for its sheer obscurity: the Valravn. According to Fabeldyr Sagnfolk, it was a man who had been turned into a raven and could only break the curse by drinking an infant's blood. Not surprising to me, infant's blood is a typical cure for such curses in Northern European folklore. I knew about it from all my werewolf studies. Another thing caught my eye. There was an illustration attached. The book clarified that this illustration was of a heraldic creature that had also borne the name Valravn, but that it was otherwise unrelated to the folkloric creature. The same way a heraldic griffin is different from a folkloric griffin. I didn't really care though. I was 8, I liked the design, I liked the lore, and for the next while I played around with the two versions interchangeably until I lost interests. About 5 years ago, I picked up Fabeldyr Sagnfolk again, and then I picked up the books in its reference list. And before I knew it, I was completely and utterly lost in the sauce. I lived and breathed Danish folklore the way only an artist with too much free time can. I posted my findings online, mostly about ghosts and trolls, and I cross-referenced from contemporary folkloric compendiums to 1800s first-hand accounts. And as my knowledge grew, so did my source criticism. And eventually I noticed that none of what I could find online, in English anyways, really lined up with what the books said. The man in the well is not a spirit of disease, he's a children's bogeyman. The Nisse is not a gnome, he's a tutelary deity. Folkloric trolls don't have tails or horns. And the Valravn described on the English-speaking web is confusing to say the least. Part 1. Folkloric sources are people too. I've collected a good handful of sources since embarking on this journey. There will be a full reference list in the transcript, and I will also provide a literature list at the end of the presentation, though unfortunately all my sources are in Danish. I'll gladly transcribe the relevant segments if anyone wants to fact-check my translations, though. I will mainly reference the first 3 books here, since they are the primary sources, with original observations by folklorists. The other 3 books provide cultural context, but they are also uncritically copying the first 3 or straight up just inventing new lore. So, what better place to start this deep dive than at the most commonly cited piece of folkloric literature? The primary source for everything Danish folklore is a massive 8-book compendium called Danske Sagn som de har lydt i folkemunde, Danish lore as told by common folk. It was written throughout the mid to late 1800s and is to this day one of the most thorough folkloric compendiums in the entire world, spanning 4,000 pages. The author, Evald Tang Christensen, was meticulous. writing down every minor variation of folklore he could find. Some chapters are straight up just 40 versions of the same exact story. He spent time with his sources, staying at their houses for days or weeks at a time, while writing down every oral tale they were willing to share. And the final 8th compendium is a list of every person he ever interviewed, with details about their life and whereabouts. I'm telling you all this because this compendium is often treated like a sort of Bible of Danish folklore. The first 7 books are considered the canon of Danish folklore, and whatever they say has, by many people, been taken completely at face value. So without further ado, here's a comprehensive list of everything this massive 4,000-page compendium has to say about the Valravn. This anecdote from Book 2 reads as follows. After a battle, if the chief or king's corpse was not found and buried, the ravens would come and eat of him, and these ravens became Valravne, and the one who ate his heart would gain human thought and could do harm, and change humans, and had superhuman power, and they were terrible creatures. The source is listed as a mill worker named Peder Johansen, born April 15, 1855. It even lists his place of residence and work. He lived in Svejstrup village in Dovre parish near Skanderborg city and worked in Fuldbro mill, right here. Knowing these details, we can even track down a photo of the man. Everyone say hi to Peder Johansen. Here's what we know about this source. Peder Johansen spent his entire life in the Skanderborg region. He was born in the mill where his father worked, and he would go on to work in various mills throughout his life. He never married, but lived with his sister for a while. He had a reputation as a brash, eccentric, and wise individual. He was well liked and was an excellent violinist who was always ready to play at a party. He was a born entertainer. He loved to tell old stories and add new details to them, and his voice was melodious and captivating. He passed away November 24th, 1928, at 73 years old, and was buried in his family's plot next to his sister. All this information is important. Trust me, I'm going somewhere with it. In his book, Gamle Folks Fortællinger om den jyske almueliv 6. tillæg, Old People's Tales About the Jewish Commoner's Life, 6th Appendix, Evald Tang Christensen writes this about Peder Johansen. Peder Johansen was born the 15th of April, 1855 in Svejstrup. His father was a miller in Svejstrup mill, and therefore he himself is a miller/mill mechanic. The word they use is møllersvend, which is hard to translate. His father's stepfather was a renowned wise man who had grown weak and died at 80 years old when Peder was confirmed, which is when Peder was around 13 years old. The same wise man was an exceptional storyteller, and it is downright impossible for Peder to remember everything he was told. Now he's a mill worker in Fuldbro mill, and it was here that I first approached him and he shared stories with me. In the years since our encounter, he has gone away for a while. In total, he has worked there for 6 years. I wrote down some of his stories in the mill's living room, where guests are served a spirit and a beer. He is also a musician, and once when he was scheduled to play at a Fastelavn game, I managed to pull him aside for a few hours before he started playing. This encounter took place in 1895, making Peder 40 years old, meaning he had last heard his step-grandfather's stories 25 to 30 years earlier. He was a middle-aged entertainer retelling and reinventing stories that were passed down to him in his tween years, and he told it at a party setting, likely after downing a good beer or two. I'm not saying this to discount Peder, I'm saying it to add some perspective. Though this anecdote about Valravn haunting battlefields was recounted in the quote-unquote Danish folkloric Bible, that doesn't automatically make it a piece of genuine folklore, i.e. lore of the wider folk. The stories told by Peder Johansen give us great insight into the culture of rural Skanderborg in the late 1800s. They tell us that a significant purpose of storytelling was entertainment, and that a good entertainer was highly valued. Peder Johansen is a reliable source for the cultural landscape in that area at that time, but he is not a reliable source for the folkloric consensus at the time. If we want to understand the current state of our folklore, we need to examine the origins of our folklore. and that includes examining individual sources and understanding them as people. If any of you are taking notes, I want you to write this down in capital letters, highlight it, underline it, paste it to your mirror. This is the thesis statement of this lecture. You cannot study folklore without studying people. You can't have folklore without the folk. Folklore is an anthropological study first and foremost. It's not the study of creatures or practices. It's the study of the cultures and lives in which those creatures and practices play a role. I can already spoil a bit of the ending for you here and tell you that this guy, Pil Johansen, is the sole source of the idea that the Valravn haunts battlefields and eats the hearts of kings. It's folklore in the sense that it's an oral story told in a community, but it's no more a part of the wider Danish folklore canon than the ghost stories my friends and I made up around the schoolyard fireplace. Before we can make any blanket statements like this creature is like this in the perception of the folk whom we are studying, we need to do some serious analytical work. For comparison, I'm currently reviewing all Evald Tang Christensen published anecdotes about trolls, and this is what my notes look like. Just pages and pages of this. Whenever I come across a trait, whether it's something mundane like trolls eating or dancing, or whether it's something wild like trolls controlling the weather or using guns, I write down that trait and then I add every anecdote with that trait to that category. Sometimes I only find one example. So far, I've only found one example out of 350 stories of trolls being afraid of thunder. Other times I find a noteworthy trend. So far, I have found 35 mentions of trolls having livestock. The trends are what you want to look for if you want to make general statements about folklore. I can't say that trolls are afraid of thunder because I only have one person saying it about one single troll. But I can say that trolls sometimes keep livestock because a tenth of the stories include that element. You can't say that Valravn are ravens who gain speech by eating the hearts of slain kings. What you can say is that one village storyteller in the 1890s made that statement. How he came up with that idea, though, that's another story. And I'm gonna take a drink of water. Part 2. Everyone loves etymological analysis. I've heard it said that the evidence for the battlefield story is in the etymology, everywhere from the Danish encyclopedia to Wikipedia to a kid's book that was published just a few months ago. The Ravn part of the Valravn's name is simple. It's just a Danish word for raven. It's the Val part that causes trouble. Val is a prefix seen in several words with several different meanings. It's found in valnød, walnut, where it has the meaning neighbor or stranger. It's found in valmue, Poppy, where it has the meaning weak or floppy. It's found in the Old Norse valr, which means falcon, which some scholars believe to be related to the later word vel, which means foreign, but don't quote me on it. And it's also found in Valkyrie, Valkyrie, where it means the slain, i.e. those who have died in battle. And it seems like this is the meaning everyone has just assumed is true. My own theory is that Pil Johansen or his step-grandfather knew about Valkyries and concluded that Valravn must have the same etymology. And when you already have the word raven of the slain, it's easy to spin a tale about dead chiefs and magical ravens, especially for a storyteller as beloved as Pil Johansen. But of course I can't know for sure unless someone invents a time machine. That's just my assumption. However, the word Valravn was not invented by Pil Johansen or his grandfather. It has its origins in a folk ballad from the 1500s. And once you take a closer look at that folk ballad, things don't quite add up. The only historical appearance of the Valravn is a folk ballad commonly referred to as Valravnen, which means the Valravn. The ballad has the following structure. The Valravn flies at night. He spots a sad maiden out for a walk. He asks her why she's sad. She replies that her fiancé has been sent away to a faraway land and she wants to see him again. The Valravn says he will help her if she gives him her firstborn. The Valravn flies the maiden to her fiancé. They are wedded. The maiden gives birth to a son. The Valravn reminds her of their bargain. The Valravn drinks the baby's blood and turns into a knight. They all pray to God to revive the baby and the baby is revived. Everyone is happy. I would sing it for you, but it has 30 verses, and the last time I tried, it took 15 minutes to get through it. And also it's in Danish. According to Jørgen Pugh, one of the premier Danish folklorists of the 20th century, there are roughly 6 different versions of the folk ballad called versions A, B, C, A, B, C, D, D, E, F, A, F, B, and F, C, D, E, F, G, H. Of these, only 4 versions are considered canonical, versions B, C, D, and E. And of these, only version D uses the word Valravn in the rhyme Villen Valravn. Version A is considered non-canonical by folklorists Jørgen Pugh and Svend Grundtvig. It follows a different structure from the other versions. All it has in common with the others is the first 3 verses and a few lines from the later verses. Version A is less like a version of the Valravn ballad and more like an intermediary between Valravn and an older ballad called German Gladensven. German Gladensven tells the story of a maiden on a voyage who is accosted by a monstrous bird, which is referred to as the wild eagle, the wild raven, Garmen, and Valravn in various versions. It's referred to as Valravn in a later rewrite by Anders S. Vedel, the same guy who wrote version F of Valravn. Version B is considered canon by Pugh. It uses the name Volfur Villeravn. Volfur is an old Danish name, while Villeravn translates to wild raven. Those of you taking notes will realize that that's the same thing they called the bird monster in German Gladensven. I can also tell you that wild wolf is a common name for werewolves in Danish folklore, and wild deer has been used for were-deer on occasion. That's a clue that'll help us later, so jot that down. Version C is considered canon, as are its derivatives. This version of the ballad was widely copied and circulated in Jutland in the 16 and 1700s. Version C uses the name Villen Valravn. There's some debate about what this name means, which I'll get back to in a moment. Version D is considered canon. It uses the name Villen Valravn. Along with versions A and B, this was the primary inspiration for Vedel's 1590 rewrite. Once again, the name does not have a clear meaning, but philologist Wilhelm Andersen speculated in his 1890 paper that it may be an example of word formation via rhyming. The Danish language does have a lot of these rhymes and apophonies, as does English. Examples of similar word formation in English include dilly-dally, flim-flam, chit-chat, and zigzag. You know, it's very common. It is possible that the name Villeravn already existed in a song, and that someone turned it into Ville Valravn, just because humans love apophonies. There's no hard philological evidence for this, so take it with a grain of salt, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. Version E is considered canon. Despite being released after version F, it follows the same structure as versions B, C, and D. It was found in a poetry book in southern Sweden in a formerly Danish territory. It uses the name Salman Villeravn, with Salman being an old Danish name. In other words, it calls the bird Salman the wild raven. Finally, version F, the most exciting of these. It's a rewrite by Anders S. Vedel, a writer who uses the name Valravn to describe monstrous birds in general. Both this ballad and his aforementioned rewrite of German Gladensven use the name Valravn, despite not really having anything in common. According to Jørgen Pugh, Vedel's choice of word was deliberate because he wanted to draw parallels between the two ballads. However, he only uses the word Valravn twice in this ballad, and he titles the ballad Wernerravn, Werner being another old Danish name, like Salman and Volfur. In his rewrite, he leans very close to the structure of version A to draw further parallels between the Valravn ballad and the German Gladensven ballad. Vedel's rewrite became widely copied in the 1800s, which definitely didn't help this already confusing situation. Jørgen Pugh speculates that Anders S. Vedel knew of an earlier version C ballad, which has not survived to this day since he named his bird Villen Valravn. However, Svend Grundtvig argues that the name in version C is not related to the human name Werner, but that Valravn is instead related to the prefix var, which is an old word for man related to the Old English word were. Basically, Sven Grundtvig argues that Ville Valravn is supposed to mean wild were raven. A quick summary before we move on. The word Valravn never occurs alone. It always shows up with the adjective wild. There is no Valravn in any of these songs, canon or not. There is only the wild Valravn. Valravn is one of the least common names used in the ballads, and is likely not the original name. Wild raven is the most common name. There is ample evidence that wild was used synonymously with were up until the 1800s. The wild raven is a tragic character who was cursed to become an animal. His curse can be resolved by drinking an infant's blood, which was a very common motif in Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, and Northern German werewolf lore. In the earliest known sources, the Valravn has no connection to war. The only source of the claim that the wild raven is connected to war is a Jutlandish small-town entertainer who loved to make up stories. Because the entertainer's story was recorded in the quote-unquote Danish folkloric Bible, it has been repeated uncritically in countless later sources, both print and online. Part 3. A heraldic head-scratcher. We got one last point of confusion to discuss before we can get to... I'm sorry, that sentence completely died. We got one last point of confusion to discuss before we can make heads and tails of the Valravn. You may remember this illustration from the beginning of the lecture. This is the coat of arms of the Ulfeldt noble family. Among heraldists, the charge on this coat of arms has been referred to as a Valravn. It was reprinted in the 1967 book Fabeldyr Sagnfolk, which was most Danes' first introduction to the Valravn, including mine. I cannot understate the impact this book has had on the Danish perception of folklore. Every creature, figure, beast, and character that was included in this book is now inseparable from its inclusion in this book. If you discuss folklore with anyone who's even mildly interested in the subject, they will eventually refer to something from this book. This was the only widely circulated visual depiction of a creature named Valravn until the advent of the internet. So it's really no wonder that people assumed this and the figure from the folk ballad were the same creature. But a simple glance at the ballad's lyrics tell you that that's not the case. The Valravn in the ballad is consistently referred to as a bird. The only supernatural thing about it, other than its ability to talk, is that it has the size and/or strength to carry a maiden in its talons. I have come to the conclusion that the ballad Valravn and the heraldic Valravn are two distinct and unrelated creatures, as unrelated as the real-world tiger and antelope are from the heraldic tiger and antelope. So why is this creature referred to as a Valravn? As with the ballad Valravn, no one knows for sure, but here are two theories. Theory 1. We know that the Ulfeldt family was largely settled in Skåne, which is in Sweden, and the Swedish word for wolf is varg. According to this theory, its original name was actually Valravn, which means wolf raven. But the sounds were over time transformed into Valravn. R to L is not an uncommon type of linguistic drift in Nordic languages. It's worth noting that the Swedish word for raven is korp, but the Skåne region has always had a good mixture of Danish and Swedish language, so it could be a combination of the two. Theory 2. According to one otherwise unreliable Norwegian family tree, the Ulfeldt family had a wolf eagle on their coat of arms. At one point, they married into the Valravn family in the Jutland region of Denmark. The name Valravn is homophonic to Valravn, and the name Ulfeldt sounds a lot like the Danish word for wolf, ulv. Thus, their heraldic beast was assumed to be a raven wolf. The truth is probably some combination of both of these series of events, but we may never know. One thing is certain, though. The folkloric Valravn is not a wolf monster. To summarize what we've learned so far, no one knows for sure where the word Valravn came from. We do know that Valravn was not the original name in the ballad. The original name was probably Wild Raven. The ballad Valravn is only ever described as a raven. The ballad Valravn is at most very loosely connected to the heraldic Valravn. The ballad Valravn is not a wolf-raven hybrid. Peder Johansen's Valravn is unrelated to the ballad Valravn and the heraldic Valravn. The ballad Valravn has no connection to war. Peder Johansen may or may not have invented a story on the spot because he was a village storyteller/entertainer. Now that we got the background information out of the way, we can get into the meat of the lecture. Part 4. Be source critical for the love of all, I'm begging on my knees. AKA folklore. My folklore is not your plaything. This entire lecture is fueled by spite, really. Whenever I looked up this creature online, I saw all 3 versions of the Valravn. Peder Johansen's warrior OC, the cursed knight from the ballad, and the Ulfeldt family mascot, all mixed together into a bastard chimera. And it pissed me off. It pissed me off even more than the frustration I feel when people ignore the socioeconomic issues in West Virginia so they can sell Mothman pins. Even more than the exasperation I feel when people refer to Jinn and yokai as fairies, and more than the bitterness I feel around pop culture Nordic mythology. This abuse of folklore feels personal. The ballad is my heritage. The storyteller lived in my partner's grandparents' region. I used to live a bike ride away from one of the Ulfeldt family's castles. So, I repeat again. You can't study folklore without studying people. You can't take the lore out of the folk, and you can't take the folk out of the lore. When you disrespect folklore, you disrespect the folks tied to that lore. During my spite-fueled deep dives, I believe I found at least one source of the confusion. You see, in 2003, a Danish TV channel released a kids show which drew inspiration from folklore. In one of the episodes, the main character is chased by a Valravn, which he then reads about in his little book of creatures. Trying to do damage control, I immediately went on Wikipedia and fixed the Valravn article as best as I could. And then I looked at the history of the article, and I found this. The first version of the article published 17 years ago. It reads as follows. Valravn, an imaginary creature, half bird and half beast, which is thought to roam desolate places in search of human blood. It was thought to be a transformed human who could only be freed by drinking human blood. Incredibly, I recognize this quote. In my frenzied collecting of folklore books, I just so happened to find the obscure book that this was plagiarized from. Vilde fugle I sagn og tro, Wild Birds in Folklore and Superstition. The paragraph reads as follows. The Valravn was an imaginary creature, a supernatural and enormous raven who often flew at night in desolate places. It was a transformed human who could only be freed by human blood. This book and others like it are the bane of my existence. They're what happens when non-folklorists try to write about folklore. It rewords all its sources to be more easily digestible to a general audience, and it never includes direct references, only a literature list on the final page. There's no way to fact-check this book unless you're crazy enough to go on a deep dive like me. You may have noticed one difference though. The Wikipedia article describes the Valravn as a half-bird, half-beast, while its source describes the Valravn as an enormous raven. I believe the author of the article may have referenced the most widely known book on Danish folklore, Fabeldyr Sagnfolk, and gotten the folk ballad and the coat of arms mixed up, probably. And isn't that the source of this entire mess? People reading about 3 different figures who happen to share a name and assuming that they must be the same thing. People reading unsourced statements about folklore and assuming they must be true. In 2009, the Danish Wikipedia article was updated with this illustration by a French Wikipedia user. How she found the article and why she decided that her illustration was a good representation, I can only guess. But 14 years later, Danish publishers are still depicting the Valravn according to her illustration. In 2013, an anonymous editor changed the article to this one single line. Valravn, in mythology, a supernatural raven who roams battlefields. again without referencing a single source. But at least we know the source of that claim, our good old friend Pille Johansen. I've seen the bastard Valravn more times than I can count now. Mostly in English sources, but plenty of times in Danish sources too. In 2023 alone, we got the aforementioned TV show Valravn, where it was depicted as a kind of griffin. The Kids' Encyclopedia Danish Folkloric Creatures, where it was depicted as an anthro bird skeleton. And the card game Monster War, where it's depicted as I don't really know what, but it's described as a creature that eats fallen soldiers to gain power. And I'm sure 2024 will bring many more disappointments. But really, I think the blame is less on uncritical authors and more on those who think the study of folklore is the study of creatures. You know, the people who don't care about the culture in which a creature was formed, but who just want to add it to their mental bestiary, as if folklore is nothing more than a game of Pokemon. We also can't ignore that there are people who want something to be true, to the point that they twist facts to suit their worldview. I consider these the two main types of fake lorists. It's not an official distinction or anything, those are just the two main motives for fake lore that I've noticed. Fake lore is intentional, so misunderstandings don't count as fake lore, which is why I don't feel like I can fully blame the uncritical authors for this mess. The main trait of a fake lorist is attempts to obfuscate or simplify folklore. The Pokemon collector might simplify the truths so they can write a concise entry in their bestiary without any caveats or footnotes. They might say, this is the one true version of the creature, which you can find in my Pokédex. Or in other words, the Valravn is a transformed man, and it roams battlefields, and it's a wolf-raven hybrid, all of them at once. The confirmation bias might obfuscate the truth or extrapolate to construct a new cultural fixture. They might say historical people were really like this, trust me, this is our heritage. In other words, the ancient Danes believed that their fallen kings could give rise to evil talking ravens. The Valravn is a totally badass part of Danish culture. It's something I've discussed a few times with my sorry, I need a drink. This is something I've discussed a few times with my acquaintance, A Book of Creatures, who, despite their name, do not treat folklore like a Pokédex. I don't think I would have made any of these realizations without their help. I can't fucking talk anymore. I don't think I would have made these realizations without their help. So shout out to A Book of Creatures, real quick. Love that person, love that blog. I can't fully blame the people who simply never dug deeper. Figuring out this mess has not been easy. I've worked on uncovering the truth about the Valravn on and off for over a year. If you never learned how to be source critical, or how to use a reference list, or how to review conflicting information, that's not your fault. Though, I think you should maybe take a break and reconsider your point of view if you run into conflicting information, rather than just shrug and mix it all together. That is inexcusable. No, what characterizes the fake lorist is not simply being wrong about folklore. Fake lorists act on an agenda. They want their version of the story to be true, more than they want to uncover the actual truth. Fake lorists want the bastard Valravn to be real, more than they want the 3 different Valravn to be acknowledged. And I have absolutely zero patience for that, no matter your reason. I don't care how attached you are to the bastard Valravn. If you won't acknowledge the truth, you are the problem. If you care more about the bastard Valravn than my country's old folk ballads, or our village storytellers, or our family trees, you need to get your head out your ass. I don't really know where to go from here. How do you combat decades of misunderstandings and misappropriations? I don't know. Maybe it's too late to save the 3 Valravn. But the Valravn is not the only folkloric creature that has suffered this treatment. You can help by always being on the lookout for direct references and not tolerating bloggers or authors or videographers whose only source is trust me. More importantly, you can help out by never forgetting the folk in folklore. Folklore is not the study of creatures or traditions. It's the study of the people and cultures in which those creatures and traditions play a role. Keep this in mind, and you're already doing a much better job than most folklorists. Also, maybe share what you've learned with other people. I can't fix the Valravn's image on my own. Thanks for listening to me rambling about my special interests. Join me next year where I'll deconstruct the cryptozoological imperative to create a world where Sasquatch is a physical, biological species. That was a joke. Please don't take me up on that offer. Now, can someone go fix the mess that is the English Wikipedia article? Also, are there any questions? I forgot to check that. No questions. Thank you so much for your help, Paige. You did amazing, I'm sure. I can't tell, but I trust everyone else. Are there English translations of that book you mentioned you devoured? I forgot the name of the words. Orange. No, there are no English translations of the Orange Book, unfortunately. Maybe that should be my next project, but it's a big project. I think it's like 300 pages with a very, very tiny font. What's your opinion on American amusement park Cedar Point using Valravn as the name of a roller coaster with a really steep drop? I can't remember what they said on the plaque about it. It mentions the myths, but I don't. I have read the Wikipedia article about that roller coaster. Actually, I couldn't really avoid it in my research. But yeah, I don't really know how to feel. Like, does it count as appropriation if it's not something we practice anymore? If it's not a belief or a song we practice anymore? I don't know. I'm the only one who has to stick up my ass about it, I think. So I don't know. How do you feel when your folklore is turned into a roller coaster in America? Mm. Do you have a favorite interpretation or version of the Valravn? I don't really, not really. Actually, I'm not even that into this creature, but it's just one that was, fun to research. But the creature itself is like, I don't know. I like the song. So I guess that version would be my favorite. I can sing the first verse for you, if you want. Okay, the first verse of the song goes like this. Ravnen flyver om aftenen, om dagen han ikke må. Han skal have den onde lykke, den gode han ikke kan få. Men ravnen flyver om aftenen. But yeah, there's like 30 verses. Also, there is a more fun melody, but I can never remember it. But the more fun melody is probably the one that people were actually singing. Because it's the melody I remember is very somber. Like, that's not something you'd sing at a party. But yeah, maybe I should do that. I mean, I really like that idea of doing a panel about cryptozoology. I have a lot of hot takes on that. Um, it was only half a joke. I have a lot of thoughts. Actually, um, about half of my thoughts about Bigfoot can be summed up in a video essay released very recently by Trey the Explainer. I'll drop it in the chat. It's an excellent video essay. Or documentary, I should call it. Here. This is a lot of what you need to know about Bigfoot and my thoughts on him. Also, many of my thoughts about Mothman can be summed up by a documentary called Atlas of Cursed Places, the West Virginia episode. And that is available on almost any illegal streaming site. And I think it's also on Disney Plus, maybe. You should check that out. Yeah. I'm glad you all liked it. I think that's about all I have to say. So thank you. See you.